Imagine being plagued from birth with a crippling list of sicknesses and diseases, migraine episodes that lasted weeks, a mysterious neurological disorder causing dizziness, tremors, seizures, and partial paralysis, among other problems. Now add psychological issues like unshakable anxiety and depression. For many people, this would almost seem like a curse straight from God, as if he was presenting some test of faith, or perhaps a punishment for an unknown transgression. Whatever the cause for such a disastrous setup, this happened to be the unfortunate reality of Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, a 19th century philosopher who endured a lifetime of unrelenting struggle that even went beyond the bouts he had with his health. Suffering the crucial loss of both his father and younger brother in his early childhood, living in poverty and eventually spiraling into a mental collapse, Friedrich Nietzsche had every reason to despise life, given the hand he was dealt. Despite the trials he was destined to face, Nietzsche found the strength to not only conquer his hardships, he also managed to impart several profound works that shook up the world before his untimely passing. From these works came what is perhaps his most famous quote, where he boldly declared, "God is dead, he remains dead, and we have killed him." A statement that's often misunderstood to have a rather dark, nihilistic meaning, when in fact the claim actually had less to do with the literal death of a divine figure and more to do with Nietzsche's displeasure of the narrow-minded views that were popular during his time. In essence, Nietzsche felt that people's need to find validation and meaning from things outside of themselves was in many ways a hindrance that kept us from achieving the highest form of ourselves. He instead wanted us to create meaning, values, and a moral code that stem from our own independent thoughts. Thus, he shared these famous words as part of a larger philosophy, which has since become affectionately known to scholars, philosophers, and historians as Amor Fati, a Latin phrase meaning love your fate. This powerful idea was Nietzsche's plea to the world, suggesting that we all learn to love life and all that comes with it, both its blessings and its misfortunes. He urged us to embrace every part of our existence, to find beauty in our struggles, and turn every challenge into an opportunity for growth. But his story raises many questions, like how could a man who suffered so much still believe in the end that life should be cherished along with all that comes with it? How is it that we can find purpose in a life that already seems to not have much meaning at all? And what are some of the lessons from his profound philosophy that we can take and apply in our own lives? The answer to these questions and more lie ahead. So stick around, subscribe for more. And this, my fellow scholars, is the beautifully tragic life of Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche was born on October 15, 1844, in the small village of Rücken in Prussia, which is now part of modern Germany. He grew up surrounded by strong religious influences. His grandfather, Friedrich August Ludwig Nietzsche, and his father, Karl Ludwig Nietzsche, both served as pastors. His mother, Franziska Oehler, also came from a devout family, with her father and brother being pastors as well. Nietzsche was the firstborn of 3 siblings. His sister, Elisabeth Furger Nietzsche, was born in 1846, and his younger brother, Joseph Ludwig, followed just 2 years later, completing the close-knit family in 1848. For Nietzsche, childhood was largely defined by education and an early developed fondness for literature, owing to his father's extensive library and structured upbringing. Despite the makeup of this seemingly rigid environment, Nietzsche enjoyed a rather solid and peaceful home life, surrounded by loving family members who cared for him deeply. What seemed like a promising start for his family, however, wasn't meant to last, unfortunately, as Nietzsche's life would take a dramatic turn for the worse. At the young age of 5, his father unexpectedly fell critically ill due to a developed brain disorder known as encephalomalacia, a condition that causes the brain to soften and eventually deteriorate. Nietzsche's father dealt with his agonizing sickness for an entire year before finally succumbing, leaving the rest of the family devastated. As a result, Nietzsche's mother was left with no choice but to step up and try to take care of the family on her own. Only a year removed from the loss of his father, however, Nietzsche's family was dealt yet another major blow, this time with the devastating loss of his younger brother Joseph. Overwhelmed with grief at this point, and in dire need of support, Nietzsche and his family turned to his maternal grandmother, who allowed them to move in with her and his two paternal aunts. Against this chaotic backdrop, to no surprise, Nietzsche's life spiraled. Although he managed to keep a close connection with his family, in school, his grades suffered. Around the age of 9, he started having his first encounters with a series of chronic health issues. Issues that would only get worse as he got older. Historical accounts suggest that his symptoms included eye problems that caused him serious pain, along with frequent episodes of migraine headaches that would last days, sometimes even weeks. With all that Nietzsche was dealing with, it seemed as though he was quickly headed down a path that didn't promise much. One day, however, a stroke of luck finally came his way. Being the son of a late pastor who was commissioned by the state, Nietzsche was awarded a scholarship to fund his education at one of the world's most prestigious boarding schools, Schulpforta, renowned for its rich culture and exceptional academic standards. Despite the hardships, Nietzsche's intellectual journey was only beginning. His scholarship to Schulpforta marked a turning point where his character was able to truly take shape. As he explored the grandeur halls of this new world amongst the elite, Nietzsche found himself laying the groundwork for what would eventually establish him as one of the most influential philosophers in history. For Nietzsche, the time spent at Schulpforta was game-changing. With so much to offer at this new private school, Nietzsche found himself in an environment where he could truly flourish. The school's high-class atmosphere was easily seen throughout the campus. Its buildings included a 12th century Romanesque chapel and 13th century Gothic church. It also boasted distinguished alumni like German idealist philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte and philologist Ulrich von Wilamowitz-Müllendorf. Here, Nietzsche was able to explore all kinds of interests. He did things like study poetry and classical music, even going so far as to dabble in composing as an amateur for a bit. He never really got good at it, and some of his worst critics would say he was a bit delusional about the talent he had. Still though, his experiences with creating his own work became fond memories for him down the line. Aside from his artistic pursuits, Nietzsche spent time reading romantic novels and pieces that challenged his views on Christian theology. He dove deep into classical literature and philosophy and became lifelong friends with scholars like Paul Deussen, a colleague who later became a renowned Eastern philosopher in his own right. Nietzsche completed his studies at Schulpforta in 1864. Now 19, he felt ready to take the next step in his intellectual journey by moving on to the university level. His experience at Schulpforta, however, was undoubtedly one of the major highlights of his childhood and teenage years, nurturing his intellect, expanding his horizons, and setting the stage for him to soon share his own creative wisdom with the world. Leaving the familiar halls of Schulpforta behind him, Nietzsche embarked on a new chapter at the University of Bonn. His time spent here was limited, but he still managed to make the most of it through his study of theology. Now, coming more in touch with his rebellious nature, he began to question the religious doctrines he'd been raised on. As time progressed, he became more and more detached from his former Christian values and found himself more in line with secular ideas. Consequently, Nietzsche turned his attention to philology, the study of language and ancient texts, seeing it as a way to unlock the true secrets of history and human culture. After spending only a semester at Bonn, Nietzsche transferred to University of Leipzig, immersing himself in the works of ancient Greek philosophers and poets. Engaging with radical thinkers like Plato and Aristotle fueled his intellectual fervor, further distancing him from his Christian upbringing. By the age of 24, Nietzsche's studies had catapulted him into a career as a professor of philology at the University of Basel, a considerable achievement for someone so young. Throughout his tenure, he made significant contributions to academic focuses through lectures and publications. He would challenge traditional interpretations of ancient Greek texts, offering new perspectives on the works of classical thinkers like Homer, Plato, and Euripides. His academic career, however, was not without its challenges. Nietzsche's unconventional ideas and unorthodox teaching methods often clashed with the conservative establishment, provoking hostility in some and a suspiciously cautious interest in others. It was around this time that Nietzsche's health problems had become significantly worse, evolving into a situation that had become practically unbearable to manage. His migraines, which had become more and more frequent over the years, were now accompanied by nausea, vomiting, and perpetual dizziness, making it difficult for him to complete his work. His vision had also drastically declined, making it nearly impossible for him to read and write. He additionally suffered from chronic stomach pain and indigestion, struggles that likely exacerbated his emotional distress and contributed to him having frequent mood swings. Though his conditions were harsh, Nietzsche's spirit never deterred. Throughout his career, he continued to write prolifically, exploring themes in art, religion, morality, and the human condition as much as he could. In 1879, now age 35, Nietzsche's failing health unfortunately became too overwhelming. He was forced to resign from his professorship, citing his growing sickness as the ill-fated cause. Heartbroken by what seemed to be the end of his intellectual journey, Nietzsche looked inward, seeking a new path for himself. Surprisingly, what he found happened to not only kickstart a brand new phase in his life, it also thrust him into a world of productivity that took his work and ideas to a whole new level, pushing him far beyond anything he could have imagined. Now freed from the constraints and restrictive protocols of academia, Nietzsche embarked on an intense expedition of creativity and self-discovery. During this period, he traveled extensively, seeking solitude and inspiration in the mountains of Switzerland and Italy. In his isolation, Nietzsche engaged in all types of activities that reflected his contemplative and introspective nature. He would take long walks and go on hikes, allowing him to think more deeply into his contemplations, like the will to power, the idea of taking pleasure in overcoming resistance and hardship, or the Übermensch. A man that not only thinks for himself, but rises above religious values and societal pressures to create his own sense of right and wrong. Nietzsche continued creating discourse around his ideas. Though they were often met with hatred and ridicule by the academic establishment, they also resonated with a growing number of intellectuals and freethinkers. Sparking waves of controversy and debate, his work also inspired new generations of thinkers who sought to break free from the constraints of tradition and forge their own path. Here we got to see Nietzsche's innermost ideas take form, forging a philosophy that was both radical and deeply personal. His writings explored themes of individualism, self-overcoming, and the will to power, ideas that gave less credit to any god for determining our fate and more to the individual. These concepts later influenced movements as diverse as existentialism, postmodernism, and even certain aspects of psychology. Nietzsche's wanderings in solidarity and inventive writing marked the emergence of a philosophical titan, one who dared to question everything. But beneath the surface of his heterodox ideas laid a deeper quest, a search for meaning in a world seemingly deprived of it. So, he set out to develop what would arguably become his most profound work, a spirited embrace of life in all its complexities, Amor Fati. By the mid-1880s, Nietzsche's health had deteriorated, leaving him physically and mentally exhausted. Still, however, his passion for sharing his ideas with the world remained completely unchanged. Against what seemed like an endless abyss of pain and suffering, Nietzsche embarked on a journey of introspection, aiming to produce a work that conveyed a much-needed message to the world. By this time, Nietzsche had become somewhat of a multi-layered figure. On the one hand, he considered himself an objective realist. Everyone, to him, had the potential to stir up evil in the world. Coupling that with the pain and suffering we all seem bound to face at some point, and life begins to paint a pretty dark picture, he thought. Overcoming injuries, battling illness, financial struggles, even the loss of a loved one, Nietzsche felt these experiences should not only be harnessed, but also be used for a greater purpose. Still thriving in his solitude, Nietzsche found solace in writing A Joyful Wisdom, known today as the Gay Science. In it, his thoughts were synthesized in a way that introduced the world to a concept he called Amor Fati, which literally translates to love your fate. Here, through poems and a collection of over 380 aphorisms, Nietzsche presents Amor Fati as a response to the growing nihilistic view during his time that life had no meaning. In a unique artistic format, he explained how struggles are a key part of building character. To him, the human spirit is like a muscle, and exercising it is the key to becoming a stronger person overall. In his writings, he detailed how our failures are something we should try and use to help us identify our weaknesses, face them head on, and turn them into strengths, thereby creating a feedback loop that allows us to learn from our mistakes. Setbacks, he argued, are the crucible of creativity. In other words, not seeing a solution to an issue can sometimes force us to think outside the box and find new ways to fix problems. Lastly, he mentioned how failures did a good job of keeping us humble, noting that they remind us of our limitations and the vastness of the unknown. It was in fact this same publishing where these ideas were all neatly packed into a 3-word proclamation: God is dead, using a metaphor as his way of acknowledging that we never needed anything outside of ourselves to create value and meaning in our lives. But as Nietzsche poured these ideas onto the page, his own reality was crumbling around him. His health continued to deteriorate, the world offered little to comfort him, and his unconventional ideas had alienated many of his peers, leaving him increasingly isolated. Even his closest relationships were strained as he struggled to maintain connections while dealing with the onslaught of his ailments. But even as he reached the pinnacle of his intellectual powers, the fragile thread holding his sanity together was beginning to unravel. The darkness he'd been grappling with for so long was closing in, threatening to engulf him entirely. The world was witnessing the dire loss of a brilliant mind, but not before Nietzsche would leave behind a legacy that would continue to challenge and inspire generations. In the years following The Gay Science, Nietzsche reached the height of his creative output. While shouldering his deteriorating health and facing growing isolation, he continued to write, publishing a series of influential works that solidified himself as the type of thinker that only appears once in a generation. While his health never improved, Nietzsche still went on to produce some of his most influential works, including Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, and The Genealogy of Morals, each of which became famous for how they creatively challenged the foundations of Western thought, questioning traditional notions of morality, truth, and religion. In 1889, Nietzsche's health had finally gotten the best of him. While living in Turin, he suffered a complete mental collapse, the exact trigger of which is unknown. Many historians and medical experts have proposed theories including things like dementia and possible brain tumors. At the time, however, medical diagnostics were not advanced enough to confirm anything one way or another. Still, his decline was made evident through several recorded instances of unusual behavior. Nietzsche would do things like sending bizarre, incoherent letters to friends and family while signing his name to suggest that he was someone else. He would have episodes where he'd randomly start singing and shouting while undressing in public. He also was incoherent when spoken to, using strange metaphors and switching between languages in the middle of his sentences. Things were pretty rough. Towards the end, Franz Overbeck, a longtime friend, sympathized with Nietzsche's situation. He traveled to Turin and brought him back to Basel, hoping that a familiar environment might be helpful. Unfortunately, this gesture didn't make much of a difference. After his return home, Nietzsche was eventually admitted to a psychiatric clinic where he spent several months before finally being released to the care of his mother and sister. Despite the struggles before his life ended, Nietzsche's legacy continues to live on, provoking and inspiring thinkers across generations. His ideas have sparked countless debates, influenced diverse intellectual movements, and challenged us to always find strength from within. His life is a testament to the philosophy he worked so hard to share with the world. Amor Fati is more than just an idea. It's a guiding principle that teaches us to embrace our fate, to find beauty in every aspect of our lives, and to turn our struggles into opportunities for growth. Just as Nietzsche himself demonstrated, Amor Fati allows us to triumph over adversity and to live each day with courage and determination, by shaping our own destinies and finding meaning along the way. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Also, feel free to check out some of our other videos. We'll see you in the next one.